Wizard Howl, said the king, that I am appointing him Royal Wizard, as from now, with our royal command to find Prince Justin, alive or dead, before the year is out. You have our leave to go now. The king gave her a friendly smile as she hobbled away. When she got downstairs, neither Michael nor Howl was there. She left the palace and hobbled down an avenue and then down another. Before long she was lost. She was just turning into another street, when there was the Witch of the Waste coming towards her. When she came level with Sophie, she stopped. "Why, it's Miss Hatter. I never forget a face, particularly if I've made it myself. What are you doing here, dressed up all so fine?" Sophie said the only thing she could think of. "I'm going to see the king. I'm going to petition him for better conditions for hatters." The witch didn't believe her for an instant. "You're going in the wrong direction. Come with me." All Sophie could do was turn round and stump beside the witch up a grand thoroughfare with a fountain at the top. "Why did you make me like this?" she asked. "You were preventing me getting some information I needed," said the witch. "I got it in the end, of course." Sophie was quite mystified by this. Beyond the fountain were the stone stairs with the palace at the top. "There you are," said the witch. Sophie looked hopelessly up the long flight of stairs. Since the witch was obviously going to stand there and make sure she went up, Sophie had no choice but to climb them. Up she hobbled, past the sweating soldiers, all the way to the palace entrance again. At the top she turned, panting. The witch was still down there, waiting to see her thrown out. Sophie hobbled over to the guards. "There was something I forgot to tell the king." They remembered her. They let her inside, and before Sophie had collected her wits, the palace machinery was in motion again, and she was being handed from person to person until the same person in blue was announcing, "Mrs. Pendragon, to see you again, Your Majesty." The king was standing at a large desk, rather anxiously moving flags about on a map. He looked up. "They tell me there's something you forgot to say." "Yes," said Sophie. "Howl says he'll only look for Prince Justin if you promise him your daughter's hand in marriage." "What put that into my head?" she thought. "Quite out of the question," said the king. He looked around. "My daughter was here just now." To Sophie's surprise, he bent down and looked under the desk. "Valeria," he called, "come on out. There's a good girl." There was a shuffling noise, and Princess Valeria shunted herself from under the desk, grinning. She had 4 teeth, but she wasn't old enough to have grown a proper head of hair. Sophie rode back to the castle's Kingsbury entrance in one of the king's coaches, drawn by 4 horses. A sergeant and 6 royal troopers went with it to guard it. The reason was Princess Valeria. She'd climbed into Sophie's lap, and Sophie's dress was covered with the wet marks of Valeria's royal approval. Next morning Howl went out very early. When Michael and Sophie came down to breakfast, Calcifer said, "Open the door to no one. The witch knows about all the entrances except Port Haven." This so alarmed Michael that he fetched some planks from the yard and wedged them over the door. Half an hour later the doorknob turned sharply to Blackdown, and the door began to bounce about. The planks clattered to the floor. Calcifer plunged to the bottom of the grate, and Michael dived into the broom cupboard, leaving Sophie standing there as the door burst open and Howl stormed in. "This is a bit much, Sophie. I do live here." He was soaking wet. The grey and scarlet suit and the ends of his hair were dripping wet. Sophie looked at the doorknob, still turned to Blackdown. Miss Angorian, she thought, and he'd been to see her in that charmed suit. "Where have you been?" she said. "None of your business." Howl shook himself. The water fell off him in a neat ring on the floor. Howl stepped out of it with his hair gleaming dry, and his grey and scarlet suit not even damp, and went to fetch the saucepan to make a hot drink. "The world is full of hard-hearted women, Michael," he said. "I can name 3 without stopping to think." "One of them being Miss Angorian?" asked Sophie. Howl didn't answer. He ignored Sophie for the rest of the morning, while he discussed moving the castle with Michael and Calcifer. Howl really was going to run away. Sophie applied herself to sewing him a new blue and silver suit out of triangles of material. But as the day wore on, Howl developed a raging cold. Finally, he took himself off to bed. Here she hoped was her chance to get the charmed grey and scarlet suit off him before it did more damage. Presently Howl called, "Help me, someone!" From then on, Michael ran up and down with lemon and honey, cough mixture, nose drops, throat pastilles, and an infusion of willow bark. Meanwhile, the new suit Sophie was sewing didn't seem to be coming out the right size. "Michael," she said, "is there a way of making small clothes larger?" "Oh, yes, that's what my new spell is, when I get a chance to work on it. But now he wants me to go to market chipping to get some things he needs for moving the castle." "But the witch," said Sophie, "is it safe?" Michael dived into the broom cupboard. But the person who came out, wearing a dusty velvet cloak, was a burly man with a red beard. This person said with Michael's voice, "Howl thinks I'll be safe enough like this. It's misdirection as well as disguise. I wonder if Lettie will know me." He opened the door green down and jumped out onto the slowly moving hills. Peace descended. Howl had evidently realised that Sophie wasn't going to run about after him. Sophie got up and cautiously hobbled to the broom cupboard. This was her chance to go and see Lettie, who must be very miserable by now. Sophie was fairly sure Howl hadn't been near her since that day in the orchard. It might just do some good if Sophie were to tell her that her feelings were caused by Howl's charmed grey and scarlet suit. Anyway, she owed it to Lettie to tell her. The 7-league boots weren't in the cupboard. Sophie turned everything out. There was nothing there but buckets, brooms, and a second velvet cloak. Howl had obviously made sure she wouldn't follow him anywhere again. She was putting everything back when someone knocked at the door and went on knocking. As she went to open it, Sophie threw the second velvet cloak round her shoulders. Calcifer stared. Then great crackles of laughter came from under the curly green flames. Wondering what the cloak had turned her into, Sophie opened the door. A huge spindly greyhound leapt off the hillside and landed in the middle of the room. Sophie dropped the cloak and backed away hurriedly. The dog somehow hoisted itself onto its lean hind legs. Then, as Sophie had her mouth open to yell to Howl, the creature put out what was obviously an enormous effort and surged upwards into the shape of a man in a crumpled brown suit.